Thank you for joining me today. My name is Jerrel. Today we will be taking a look at Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition for the Nintendo Switch. In particular, we are going to explain the technical aspects that contribute to why this game looks so much better than the Pokemon games, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, and other Pokemon titles on the Switch, and also why the game runs better as well. This is a question that you have asked. The viewers have requested I cover this topic, so we will be taking a look. Now, just to have full transparency here, I have not purchased the game. I do not own a copy of this game yet. My hands are very full at the moment. I will explain at the end of the video, but I have not played. So I will be taking a look at the video from Nintendo Life. I will put the link in the description. So you can check out their review, which is very good. I'll put that in the description. So let's go ahead and get started by taking a look at the video footage here. So right off the bat, we know that this game is created by Monolith Soft using their own in-house engine, which means that they can customize the game in every single possible aspect to run exactly how they want. And this also means that they can optimize as far as they need to. Something that we have heard behind the scenes, and again, I do not personally know the developers at Game Freak. I do not personally know the developers at Monolith Soft, so I am not here to insult or belittle or degrade anyone working at those studios. I do not know them personally. I respect the work that they have done. I will be speaking as a professional here in terms of just business practice and actual development experience. So something we've heard from behind the scenes with Game Freak is that at least, you know, for a significant number of years, there was a high turnover rate. They would bring in younger developers who had less experience. They would work on a Pokemon game and then they would cycle those developers out and then bring in new people. Whether this was to preserve the hierarchy so that people that are in higher up positions that have been there for longer, maintaining positions of seniority, whether they can maintain those positions, whether they didn't have to pay people as much money by giving them promotions. I do not know the reason, but we do know that people were cycled out of Game Freak. These are just rumors, right? People have reported that, but whether or not you choose to believe that, but that is a major problem. I don't know the goings-on of Monolith Soft here, but to me, this looks like a product that is made by people that have been working as a team for a long time. This looks like people that have been using the same engine for a long time, so they're very familiar with what they are doing. With the Pokemon games on Switch, it is clear that the people working on that do not have... Again, I'm not trying to sound cruel or mean here, but they lack the experience necessary to achieve the vision that they are aiming for while maintaining a high level of polish, given the amount of time they have for development. So, something I want to point out here, we'll start taking a look at the technical aspects here, is this game was originally created on the Wii U. It already has a significant advantage. A game that runs on the Wii U well is going to run brilliantly on the Switch because the Wii U is significantly older and weaker. What I see on the foliage here is that this is actually simpler. There's less geometry. It is a simpler rendering method. In the past, in a number of the videos that I've made regarding these sorts of topics, I mentioned something called a shader. Every piece of geometry uses a shader, and a shader is basically a part of a program that tells the game engine how a piece of geometry looks. How is it rendered? How should it calculate the lighting and other aspects in the scene? A high complexity shader is more demanding on the processor. And so when you have objects that use high complexity shaders, for example, having photorealistic graphics requires high complexity shaders. those are more demanding. Every game has a rendering budget. That doesn't mean real world money. It means the hardware itself can only render to a certain extent. It can only process to a certain extent. You have a budget that is determined by your CPU and your GPU. The stronger your CPU and GPU are, the higher your rendering budget. The more RAM you have, the more memories you can load into texture, etc. And so when you have high complexity shaders, you use up a significant amount of your rendering budget, your processing budget. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, the shaders that they use are modern, and you would think it's a modern game, it's a newer game, we should use the high complexity shaders. The problem is they do not use the high complexity shaders well. Art, visual expression, and especially with games, they are not about fidelity. I often see people on the internet comment, and sometimes even on my videos, saying, oh, a game doesn't look realistic, the graphics are bad. Incorrect. Wrong answer. Having realistic graphics does not make something better. What is important is expression. What are you saying, and how are you saying it? How effectively are you communicating and expressing an idea? So, I explain that because what we're going to look at in Xenoblade Chronicles X, and I mean this in the very best way possible, everything about the graphics in this game are actually worse than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. And I mean that by saying, you know, oh, it has less fidelity. These graphics are actually way less realistic than Scarlet and Violet. Scarlet and Violet has way more calculations when it comes to lighting and reflections. So for people out there that say realistic graphics are better, I'm trying to explain to you, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet have way more realistic graphics because they are more complex, they have more lighting and more shadow calculation. All of the graphics that we see here in Xenoblade Chronicles X are actually worse. They are less realistic, they are simpler, but the people that created these visuals and implement them understand that expression is far more important than fidelity. The amount of detail you have is nowhere near as important as the actual detail itself. So if we have a look at the bushes here, you can see they're actually quite simple. The way that they sway in the wind, have a look at that, is very simple. These larger bushes don't sway that much. They do not cast shadows. You can see that they don't cast shadows on the ground. If they were to cast shadows on the ground, it would cost a significant amount on the rendering budget, and it would be more difficult to handle all of that while maintaining a decent frame rate. Something that we see here that I notice on the terrain is that these are actually similar resolution textures to what we see in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Now the texture resolution, whether it is small, if the resolution is low on the textures, you tend to see pixelation and it looks blurry. When you have high resolution textures, they tend to look very sharp and detailed. You need to find a balance because you can only fit so much into your memory, your RAM. High resolution textures obviously take up significantly more RAM, and if you try to load too many things into RAM, your game crashes. So these are implemented significantly better because it is not just the textures themselves that are creating a sense of form and shape. The geometry itself has actually been considered. If you look at Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, you will see the geometry for the environments are actually extremely simple. They have not been considered in the way that they would react to lighting and shadows in conjunction with the textures and how all of that plays in together with the other elements in the scene. What I see in this is that they have considered how things will look in context, the viewing angles of the camera, how the lighting and shadows will affect the geometry, and you can see they've actually shaped the terrain geometry in such a way that it looks interesting in the way that the light hits it. It makes it look like it is an actual form that is interesting. If you look at Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, these are considerations that are not made. This means that the people that created those environments had less experience developing 3D. Now, I'm not saying that this is bad. I'm saying that those developers need more time to work in 3D and to develop their understanding of visual communication and expression. The visuals in Scarlet and Violet are actually more advanced, but they're not used as well. These visuals are significantly less advanced, but they are used much better because the development team here has significantly more experience. The artists have a stronger grasp of visual expression. You can see that this is not even high poly count, right? This is actually quite low poly count, but they've structured it in a way to where they are using their rendering budget very well. You can see there is a form of texture overlays here. I'm trying to consider terms that you'd be able to understand. So we have lower resolution textures that are bigger, right? From a distance, these look good. When you get close, they are using an overlay texture on this. In Unity, you would refer to it as a detail map. But as you get closer, you can see this area here is lower resolution, while this area here is higher resolution. And this is a form of showing that the artist here considered how things will look from a distance, and also how they will look from up close. So this area doesn't look as good because it's blurry up close, but from a distance, it looks good. And then up close, this area looks good because it is quite sharp. If you see this area from a distance, it's actually not going to look that good because you will see obvious tiling. Textures have to repeat, but you can implement certain visual techniques that actually prevent tiling. And what they'll do is they'll sample different parts of the texture and they'll repeat them in splotches so that there is no obvious tiling. But that method is a little bit more advanced. That takes that takes a bit more preparation and work ahead of time. And I have a feeling this engine probably has that technique built in, which would be very good. In Unity, it is not built in, but you can purchase third-party elements that can allow you to achieve that. Now, something that I need to make very clear here is that this game has a significant advantage over Pokemon. I'm not going to join the internet on dogpiling the Pokemon games on Switch and saying, oh, they're bad, they're bad. I consider all of these games from a technical aspect, and I do not envy the developers of Pokemon on Switch because they face a momentous challenge. This is something that people just do not understand, because I've seen basically the entire range of people discussing and complaining about the Pokemon games. Something they do not understand is how many are in Scarlet and Violet? Like 700? I don't know how many they've cut out of the Pokédex, but that is 700, 800 Pokemon. Those are graphical assets that, on a technical aspect, need to be able to exist anywhere at any time. It was probably asking too much to make Scarlet and Violet open world, because that means that not only do you have to consider that you have the graphical assets of the entire world, you have the buildings, the foliage, the terrain, you have to be able to load in at any point any of those graphical assets. And that poses a challenge, because technically that stuff can fill up the memory and there's no way to control that. Any of those assets can be loaded in at any time. You can overload the memory and you can very easily cause the game to crash by just trying to load too many things into memory. And so the end result of Scarlet and Violet was trying to balance the requirements of, you need to be able to load in 800 Pokemon. There's no way to stop that from happening because Pokemon are wandering. You have your Pokemon that can exist. You do not leave the overworld. In the past, you could leave the overworld, which means you can remove assets from memory, and then you can bring in as many Pokemon as you need so that you can have your high-definition textures, your sound effects, your models, and animations. Not having the battles take place in a separate environment in Scarlet and Violet causes huge issues, and that's why the game is where it is they spent so much time balancing that. So this game has a tremendous advantage because you do not need to have access to 800 different unique creatures. And so that's a point I want to bring up, is I think people take for granted the sheer amount of content that's in the Scarlet and Violet games. And it's a real shame. I feel like management probably decided what they want Scarlet and Violet to be without really fully understanding the technical challenges. The fact that Scarlet and Violet works is a miracle. It's a miracle that works, but it is unfortunately bound by the massive technical constraints. Whereas this one, you know, you can have these textures because you don't need to load in. They know for certain, they know exactly which enemies need to be in which areas. They can unload and load things in at any time, and they can manage that on a deeper level. So something I'm noticing here, again, if you look at the animations, not the wind simulation on the foliage here, significantly less advanced than in Scarlet and Violet. If you have a look at the terrain, so I mentioned shaders. If you look at the terrain here, I know we're sort of sticking to this area, but it's showing us a good example of what we need here. And you can see an example of low resolution terrain that looks good from a distance, you know. But the terrain here is actually using very primitive shaders. Again, I explained shaders earlier in today's lesson. This to me looks like a basic specular shader. It's able to calculate light a little bit, and it can look shiny a little bit. This has been around for decades. It is extremely basic. And so the graphics are worse. But again, it is not about fidelity. It is about expression. And they've used this technology because using a specular shader is very cheap on the renderer. It's easy for the renderer to handle. Here's an excellent example of the terrain here, and they are using detailed maps. I do believe that they are using, no, I don't believe, I know for a fact. They're using technological techniques that allow them to paint extra details onto the terrain. So this is an excellent example here. You do not see this tiling anywhere, so they would have manually painted that on. That is not modeled in. That is part of a texture. So they're able to paint that on with a texture in the game engine to hide any obvious tiling. This is something, you understand this concept and you're able to create these solutions if you have significant experience working in 3D games. This is something that we absolutely do not see in Scarlet and Violet. It is nothing to do with the budget. It has nothing to do with caring about making a good game. It comes down to experience working in a 3D environment and your ability to come up with solutions for issues that you are actually able to see and understand. So they've done an excellent job on here. They do not use volumetric lighting. Volumetric lighting is a more advanced rendering solution that basically simulates density, atmospheric density. It allows us to create, you know, sunbeams and fog, and, you know, it simulates dirt and moisture in the atmosphere. And as things, you know, block that out from the light, you see sun shafts and light beams. That's extremely expensive. This does not use that. This uses a combination of distance fog, which is very basic. We've had that for decades and decades. And it's using distance fog in combination with lens flares. This is just lens flares. They're all designed in different ways, and it simulates a form of a volumetric lighting. Scarlet and Violet don't have volumetric lighting either. The game would run at 1 frame a second if they even tried. What I see here, I do not believe that we see any depth of field, which means that things in the foreground are sharper and things in the distance are blurry. That is a photographic technique. In Hyrule Warriors, the second one, we see depth of field, and it has a significantly negative impact on the frame rate there. This does not have that, and it allows the frame rate to stay very good. I need to just make an admission here. One of my weak points for games is mechs. I absolutely love mechs. I will basically buy and play anything that has a mech, and unfortunately I just do not have the time for that right now. I'm a massive Gundam fan. My favorite is Gundam Wing, but I have been advised by the Gundam community that I am not allowed to be a Gundam fan if Wing is my favorite. G Gundam would be my second favorite. Shining Burning Finger, everybody. But this is a situation where they are using verticality. So this comes down to artists, artistic understanding of how important verticality is in a 3D environment. We see many structures like this, right? We have overhang like that. We are breaking up a visual horizontal line. Now, there is a visual philosophy that I personally, myself, call breaking the line. The most boring thing to see in any visual medium is a perfectly straight line. Let's say you have a black horizon, a black landscape, and a white sky, and it's just a straight line. That is the most boring thing you can look at. You need to break the line by adding details and color. And what strong artists need to consider when you are building environments is you need to consider where the perspective camera is going to be and what the player is going to be looking at. Where is the player going to be aiming the camera? Where are they going to be looking? And if you find a line, you need to break that line. And you break that line by adding details in the landscape geometry, in the topology of your landscape, by adding bushes, grasses, trees, shrubs, I think I'm supposed to call them. And if you have a look at this game, it is clear that these developers understand, these artists understand that concept, whether they call it breaking the line or not. It is something that you need to consider in your own works. And if you pause this at any point, you will never see a boring, dull horizon. But if you have a look at Scarlet and Violet, the environments don't really understand that concept. They have not broken the line. And it results in Scarlet and Violet looking very dull and plain. You can see they're using distance fog to make this area here look softer, and it makes it look like it's fading into the atmosphere, into the background. It gives the atmosphere a sense of depth. It makes the world feel like, oh, there's atmospheric density here. It's fading into the color of the atmosphere. And so it ends up looking, to our eyes, we say it looks realistic, but it's not just about, again, it's not about realism. It is about expression, and it is expressing, it is saying. What is it saying? It is saying that this world has an atmosphere. It has density to it. When you look at Scarlet and Violet, they made a number of huge improvements and adjustments over the updates with Scarlet and Violet, but they still just don't understand that concept that well, but they have made huge improvements. I see people don't really acknowledge or talk about that because people made their mind up about Scarlet and Violet very early on. Here's a very strong example of, again, worse graphics are actually better. The water shader, again, I explained what a shader is earlier. You need a water shader to make something look like water. Again, it is not actually water. And I will have to get out of the way here for just a moment so you can see this better. So this looks like water. It is not actually water. None of this is real. These are not actually trees. These are not actually monsters. This is not actually water. As an artist, as a game developer, you need to understand these concepts, that you are not actually creating the thing that you think you are creating. You are expressing the idea of something, and this level of communication with your audience only works because we have shared cultural memories. We know what water is, we know what trees are. If you were to show this scene to someone who has never seen a tree, to someone who has never seen water, they would have no idea what they are looking at. They would have no idea what these things are supposed to be. So this environment, these games only work because we share cultural memories. We know what water is. Now, this water is significantly worse than the water in Scarlet and Violet. In Scarlet and Violet, it is infinitely more realistic. We have real-time reflections, and we have advanced refraction. We can see the environment in real time. Models like the Pokémon are reflected in water. It is better graphics, it's realistic, but it's worse. And because the way that they express that is just not visually appealing. It has a significant performance cost. It makes the performance way worse. And because of the performance cost, they have to make the reflection resolution very low. So you see the reflections in Pokemon are extremely pixely. They're pixelated. I'll return now. And here you can see that it is actually worse. We do not have real-time reflections. This is using a baked texture to communicate a sense of reflections, but you can see it is not actually reflecting the trees back here. It is not actually reflecting the monsters, but it just looks better. And why does it look better? Is because what it is expressing is more coherent. There is a vision that it is expressing, and because the graphics are worse, the performance is significantly better. This is how this game is able to run better and look better than Pokemon, is the developers, the artists, understand what expression is. They understand that you do not need to have higher fidelity to make your product better. And this is a scene, again, this is a good example of using distance fog. Just a little bit of distance fog. You can tell where the landscape is receding back into farther into the background because they blend into the color of the sky. This is using very basic distance fog, but again, it breaks up the visual line, not just in the form of the landscape, but the color as well. And what it is expressing is there is atmospheric density, and this object is farther back than these objects here. So that's a good example of that. This is a very strong example of breaking the line. Again, there's no flat line here. As you can see, the landscape is broken up with grass that sways. We have something like this here that breaks that visual line. We have visuals here, but you can see that they are using these particle systems. These are not volumetric fog particles. This is very basic. Using a particle system is extremely simple. Unfortunately, on any kind of game hardware, basically the most difficult thing to draw is transparent particles. So though it may not seem like it, this thing is probably the most expensive thing in the scene to render. So this is a predetermined particle system. They would say, oh, here's a long box-shaped generator, generates particles. When you view it from this angle, it makes it look like there's fog rising up out of there. It's a very simple technique, very easy to implement, very simple to implement, but it makes it so interesting because this is, again, breaking the visual line, and it makes it feel like, oh, there's something over there. There's a separation of the planes here. We break the line here with the verticality of these pillars here. Not pillars, they're rock structure formate, geologic features. We break the visual line here, not just by going vertically, but horizontally as well. And then we have these fantastic clouds that are baked. These are not real time. Again, these are way worse. This is worse. This is way less realistic than the Pokemon Scarlet and Violet clouds. The clouds there are more realistic. There's layers to them, but they look way worse because the expression, what they are saying, is just not as interesting. They are not considered well. This is so fantastic. This is really one. The more I look at this, the more I admire the level of understanding that has gone into this game. So this is just wonderful. This is so fantastic. Some details like this that break out there. I'm sorry. I'm slipped out of my instructor role. I'm just admiring this for a second. So something that they do extremely well here, and this is how they're able to have high resolution textures, is that the vast majority of the landscape textures, because it's so prominent, the developers understand what they need to use their rendering budget, their processing budget, and their memory budget on. Again, the memory budget is restricted by the amount of RAM, and I've shipped titles on the 3DS, Wii U, and Switch. I've also developed and shipped games unofficially via homebrew for older consoles as well. So I have a very strong understanding of what it takes to make these games work. And what I'm seeing here is that the vast majority of the textures used for the landscapes are basically the same thing. There actually are not that many different textures. And if this were to happen in any other game where the artists and the developers were not as... This is a masterclass. Now that I'm looking, I have to say it, this is a masterclass in artistic expression, not just in artistic expression, but it is a technical achievement and a masterclass in game design. Because I'm really only seeing like 4 or 5 unique biomes and textures when it comes to that. You have this sort of, there's a brown rock, a gray rock, and a green sort of a situation here that looks like grass. I'm not seeing much more, and then you have sand here as well. So there actually are not that many unique biomes when it comes to that. And because of that reason, it means that they can spend their rendering budget on higher resolution textures, and they can use this special technique to paint onto the terrain itself. They can paint textures onto it like a form of splat map, a splat detail map, to eliminate tiling. That is how they're able to make this look so good, is less. They have less than Scarlet and Violet. If you look at Scarlet and Violet, there isn't a higher level understanding of this concept. And so there's way more unique biomes in Scarlet and Violet. There's way more unique ground textures, but they're just not used as well. And because they have more, they're trying to cram in more than the hardware is capable of doing, and more than the developers are able to handle, while making it look polished. Yeah, if you go through this footage, you'll see that there isn't actually that many unique biomes. It's all sand, grass, and brown rock and gray rock. But because the geometry has been constructed in this way, this is bespoke, they've done this by hand, it makes the environments look very interesting while not having a huge performance cost. This is actually a low polygon count, but it is extremely strong expression. They've done this so well. I'm just gonna let this play now, because I realize now that I've been going on, and I sound like I'm a broken record when it comes to admiring this, but the more that I look at it, the more that I admire it. Again, strong use of understanding of color. You need color intensity. I'm just going to have to pause it again. You need color intensity to make games look expressive, to make art expressive. Having realistic colors is very dull and boring. If you have a look at Pokemon, it tries to be vibrant while not being vibrant enough, and they don't understand that you need brilliant, vibrant colors like this for something to be visually engaging. This is a form of art. It's communication. The best moments in Scarlet and Violet visually are when the game gets close to sunset and the lighting is vibrant and rich and saturated. And during the daytime, Scarlet and Violet does not look good. And I'm not saying that it is a bad game. I've strongly enjoyed playing through Violet, but the game is visually weak. It just isn't strong in terms of communication and visual appeal. Even in these dull areas, you can see they've broken the line with the way that they build their environments. They know where to place these geologic features to break the line. These are very strong artists, and my heart is like going crazy right now because I'm looking at these giant robots fight. I love giant robots so much. I really want to play this game. I want to play this game so much right now. I'm supposed to be here as an instructor, but I'm also a gamer, and I was a gamer before I was before I was an educator and an instructor and a presenter. I was a gamer, and I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, let me in that giant robot, man. So I have a lot of work that I need to finish. So that's basically what I want to say here. I hope I've communicated clearly the reasons why this works so much better. These shaders on the characters, I haven't even reached this part yet. These graphics are worse than Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. They are significantly simpler. The shaders are extremely basic. These are specular shaders, which means they cannot realistically calculate the lighting and reflections in the environment. In Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, many of the shaders, not all of them, the vast majority are using physically based shaders. And a physically based shader is basically our most modern standard for shaders. And they are able to calculate lighting and reflections very realistically, but they have a very high performance cost. On the Switch, standard shaders, the physically based shaders, are extremely expensive. These are not physically based shaders. These are specular shaders. We've had specular shaders for decades now. We have many people gaming these days who are full-time gamers that were born after we introduced specular shaders. And you can see that they express a sense of light because they are still able to have darker areas and lighter areas on a piece of geometry. So these graphics are worse. By every single metric, every single piece of graphic here is worse than Scarlet and Violet, but because they are worse, the game is able to run better. The hardware does not have to work as hard. This does not use up as much rendering budget. Believe it or not, the Switch is actually very good at crunching polygons. It's good at high polygon stuff to a certain point. Once it reaches a certain poly count on a single model, then it starts to struggle. But up to a certain point, the Switch is very good at crunching polygons. This is so basic, but it is the expression, it is what it is saying, it is how it is saying that makes it visually appealing and effective, and why it is so much better than the graphics in Scarlet and Violet. These do not need to calculate lighting and reflection in an advanced and realistic way. This is actually not realistic at all. This is low fidelity when it comes to the lighting. People are saying, oh, the lighting looks so good. No. In the Nintendo Life review, they said the lighting looks so good, it's so advanced. They're actually wrong. The lighting is not good. The lighting in this is actually bad. This is basic, simple lighting, but it is used masterfully. The artists that implement this, the developers that put this all together, they understand what looks good, and they know how to use their rendering budget in a way where they can make something look good, even though, by all metrics, technically this is bad graphics, because it is not realistically receiving light sources, it is not calculating light, it's not using ray tracing, it is not bouncing light off of these surfaces and then reflecting onto the character. These are technically bad graphics, but what it is saying, how it is saying it, makes it look good. It just looks good. And it looks good because it is visually cohesive, is coherent, and the artist has decided how this should look. They are determining every single aspect of how this should look. And because you have a strong artist making those decisions, it looks good, man. This looks awesome. I'm going to break down a couple of small elements here. For example, we have darker areas on the armor here, and we have an expression of catching the light just here. It catches the light hard on the edge, and then it softens as it tapers in. We manually paint in a little bit of shadows here. This is done by hand. The shadows are manually painted in here. We have just small little details that look like tape holding these pouches on. We use normal maps. Normal mapping is it's a texture that adds bumpiness. Basically adds bumpiness to 3D models without having to directly model. So these details here are not part of the 3D model, they're part of a texture map. They are generally faster to do, they're easier to edit and modify. Depending on what you're doing, they can be more expensive than just modeling on the character. You need to understand the difference. You need to know when you should use a normal map and when you shouldn't if you're concerned about your budget and scalability. How often should you modify or edit that? You can see the normal mapping is used to add a little bit of detail to these buttons here so they catch the light. So they're casting shadows and catching the light in just a way. These are all very small details that are bespoke. They're done by hand because these are decisions that the artists have made. If you look at the graphics for Scarlet and Violet, there's more. There's more of this. It's high resolution, there's more, but they are not considered well. They rely on detail maps, which just flatly splat a texture onto a part of a character's geometry. And you can see like, okay, well, you can kind of see the thread here. Oh, this kind of looks like cloth, this kind of looks like metal, but it is not as well considered here. The artists have a stronger understanding of working in 3D. So, and I'm not saying, oh, the artists in Pokemon are worse. I'm not saying that. I'm saying the artists here have more experience working in 3D and visual communication in 3D game environments. These are all bespoke. There's many modern developers rely on programs that create clothing in extremely high fidelity and high poly count, but it makes the games run terribly. These are visuals, these are 3D models that are created by hand. This was not generated by a clothing creation program. These were modeled by hand, which means they can be highly optimized and they just look brilliant. Oh, this is so fantastic here. I really want this game now that I'm looking at it like this. These monsters are cool. I mean, I don't personally, have much to say about the monsters. They look very cool. But something I noticed, like details like this, like having the hair, and this is so simple. This is really basic. These are simple graphics, low poly count, but they're implemented in a way that adds depth to it. You can see a bit of shininess in the material underneath the hair. Having a little specularity under that makes it clear there are multiple layers to this creature. Even though there are not, they're using the most basic rudimentary visual technology to make something look like it has more depth than it actually has. And that is why this game looks so good, is the artists know how to make something look way better than what it actually is. So this is VLC freaking out. This is not the game doing that. This is, whenever I scrub through, sometimes VLC will throw a little bit of a tantrum, but that's okay. Tantrums subside as long as adults are patient and wait for children to calm down. This is fantastic. Did you enjoy this video? Have you enjoyed hearing about this information? And have you played this game? And if you have played this game, I would be interested in hearing from you in the comment section. Unfortunately, I won't have time to play this game. I have to work on my own games that I'm developing here. So thank you very much for joining me. Again, the reason why I haven't purchased this, the reason why I haven't played it myself, is I'm currently finishing up development on my own titles right now, my own games, and I'll share a little bit of that with you now. So thank you for watching this video. So I'll just share a snippet of my development environment here. This is Silver Falls Undertaker's Ultimate Collection. This will actually include 3 or more totally unique brand new games all in one. It will include the original Undertakers. So I originally created Undertakers for the 3DS and brought it to the Wii U by popular demand. The game was designed to be as faithful to the old Atari 2600 games as possible. The story of the original game was set in the 70s, and so I wanted to set the tone of that in a deep way that people could really connect with, that sort of you see this and you hear it and it sort of teleports you, and it feels like a form of time travel. So with the remake, I want to expand upon the original by implementing modern game design ideas, like leveling up your weapons and having more complex, deep combat and having more fluid gameplay, whereas the original game was restricted by feeling like an Atari 2600 game. I wanted to stay true to the spirit of the original game, of looking like an old Atari game, just more advanced. It had gone 3D. And it's difficult to strike that kind of balance, but I'm quite excited to be able to share a little bit of this footage with you here. And I feel that when you look at this, it feels like you're being teleported back in time. It feels like a form of time travel. And so the story here is creatures have appeared in the forest and they're kidnapping children and sticking them in pits deep in the ground. And you have to save the kids from the creatures that are called Undertakers. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed having a look at that. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you would like to see other videos of a similar topic, please feel free to check these out on the screen here. Enjoy, be well, work hard, spend time with your loved ones. We'll see you in the next video.